Good morning. I'm Darrell Gunter, your host for Leadership on WSOU 89.5 FM. Today, we're so pleased to have Mr. Dominic Ashley-Timms, the CEO of Notion, the author and creator of the Star Manager program. Dominic is a recognized thought leader in cultural change and management transformation, and his pioneering work in operational coaching has helped organizations worldwide shift from directive management to inquiry-led leadership. Dominic, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. Pleased to be here.
So, you've dedicated your career to redefining management. What inspired you to create the Star Manager program and its focus on operational coaching?
Well, it's a long story. We've been running this business now for 25 years, and I started life in the change management arena. I worked in consulting, and I guess I became frustrated by the way that change was done and how much pressure was put on managers to bring change about. And I noticed that those managers who tended to ask more questions actually generated more support from the people who are going through the change, and the fear of change itself went down. And I thought there was something in this. And when I began my own company, Notion, it was initially to provide that change support to organizations going through change. And we worked with project managers to really help them develop the behaviors for really engaging people in the change that was happening. And over the years, we were able to codify the behaviors that really make a difference. So project managers not just running the project really well, but really engaging people and helping make that change a reality. And over time, we were able to codify that into a model called the STAR model. And when we initially began training project managers, that quickly grew, and we found we were working with increasingly larger audiences of just normal managers who wanted to develop these engaging skills for effectively how to manage more effectively and engage people more fully. And that really is the history and the pedigree behind what's now become the Star Manager program. And yeah, it's been a real journey.
Asking questions is so important. And as I tell my students in my class, it's the soft skills that are the hardest to develop. Within your program, you talk about asking questions and engaging and asking those questions and engaging with them
Yeah,
draws them to um, I guess be better motivated to work with you.
sure.
Talk to us about the skill set of asking questions and asking the right questions.
Yeah, that's a real great question itself, Darrell. Thank you for asking it. And to any of your listeners, I hope they're nodding as I just explained this. But when we first take on our management roles, no one ever really sits us down and says, "Hey, now you're a manager. Here's how you might want to think about adapting your communication style. Here's how you can better engage with people." We're sort of left to fend for ourselves, really. And what that means is we tend to default to doing what we're pretty good at and what probably got us promoted, which is solving problems. So when we ask questions, we tend to use what we call a diagnostic form of questioning. We're asking questions to gather information so that we can understand how to solve the problem. And what we found was that as a style of management, that tends to push people away because you end up taking on the work yourself as a manager. You're solving the problems and you're just directing people to carry out instructions. And so that's almost a push away type style of management. But if we can flip that on its head and stop using diagnostic questioning and instead learn how to use what we call purposeful inquiry,
Mhm.
this is learning how to ask questions that would be most helpful to the person you're engaging with right now, to help them do the thinking, to help them employ their own problem solving skills. Then what we're doing effectively is pulling people towards us. We're engaging them differently. And because those questions are perceived as authentic, we're coming from a good place. And we're also, by asking those questions, telling the other person that we acknowledge them, we see them, we believe they have it within them to be able to come up with an insight themselves, and that we can help support them then take an action. So there's a really powerful shift there. And this purposeful inquiry is something that none of us are taught. It's perhaps, I was working with a senior lady recently. She said it's the sort of thing perhaps you might get better as you progress through your career, and just as you get really good at it, you retire. And I thought that captures it nicely. And what we want to do is bring that right to the front end of people's management careers and help them develop this purposeful inquiry approach, which pulls people towards them and really helps them to draw on the skills and talents that everybody in our team has to offer, if only we took the time to engage them differently.
And this purposeful inquiry, which I love, um, for the individual manager who's learning this skill set,
Yeah.
what are the key things that they have to do to change, to be able to ask questions versus to be able to telling folks what to do?
Yeah, this is a real challenge because a lot of management development training tends to be very didactic. It's a very tell-based or advocative training, saying that you should do this, you should because it's good. And what we found in our behavioral work over all those years with managers is that is not the way to help managers to learn. And what we have to do is we have to create the conditions where managers are confident to have a little go at trying something differently and then seeing the impact that that has for themselves. And of course, each one of us is different, so that I might try something and that will generate some sort of response, which I'd make a distinction about. You'll try something and gain a different distinction, but we'll both slot that into our own management style, and that is what we found is an effective way for helping people to develop. But to your question, what do they have to do? One of the things that's the most challenging in learning to change our behavior and to move towards this purposeful inquiry style is actually learning how to stop. When people come to us for help, because we've not been shown any other way, we feel obliged to help. We probably do know how to solve that problem because we probably used to do that sort of problem solving in our previous role. But actually, if we can stop and actually bite our tongue and prevent ourselves from giving them the answer just long enough to think about what does the other person need from me right now, then we can start to see there's an opportunity to ask them a question in a different way that stimulates their thinking. So I think in order to begin to take on these new behaviors, we have to recognize that when we think we're helping, often we're not. And actually, if we scrape away at that, we can often find that we're marginalizing the people who work for us because we're denying them that opportunity to show us the thinking they could have done had we had the presence of mind to be able to ask them a question that gets them to show us the thinking they could do.
Interesting you should mention that because there was a mentor of mine years ago. He worked in the U.S. government for the HUD organization, and he always talked about having the monkey to be put back on their backs when his folks would come into his office and say, "Well, I got this issue and I wanted to get your thoughts." And then he would actually do the purposeful inquiry, but in his words, put the monkey back on their back so that they can solve the problem because they have all of the information more so than he does.
Yeah, and you can see why that's so important because yeah, as managers, we're not facing less work. We're absolutely swamped, and currently I know figures within the US are indicating that 50% of all managers report being burnt out. And part of the reason is because they're stepping into absolutely everything, feeling that they're obliged to be able to keep things going and solve the problems. But actually, that isn't the way to resolve all these issues. What we need to find is a much more equitable way of engaging the skills and talents around us in a respectful and inclusive way, which purposeful inquiry allows us to do in a really authentic way, where actually we're giving people the opportunity to show us what they can do. And that's what people want to have happen. They want to be engaged at work. They want to be valued for their contribution. They want to be acknowledged. And with Generation Z now entering the workforce, I think 27% of the workforce this year will be Gen Z. They do not want to be managed. They do not want to be directed. If any of your listeners are nodding right now, and I have Gen Z in my business, they want to be running my business after the first 2 weeks. They want to show what they can. They want to show what they can do. They want to be cultivated. And those young people who are entering the workforce and not finding a manager that can cultivate them or can coach them on the job, they're leaving. And that's just the nature of the situation we're in. As managers, we need urgently to think about how we're going to engage this newer generation that has this huge potential. If we can just tap into that using this purposeful inquiry approach, something we now call operational coaching.
Well, you'll be pleased to hear that I spoke about this at my class the other night, Tuesday evening,
Great.
that I'm going to have this interview, and their assignment for the next class is to listen and provide me an overview of what they heard,
Right.
and how will they apply that and their respective, because there's a mix of undergraduates and graduate students in the class. What are the key skill sets you feel that managers today, um, young and old,
Mhm.
um, what are the key things that they need to be mindful of learning how to manage this new generation of professionals?
It's a very complicated answer because so much of the management development training that is out there now is responding to the symptoms, the modern symptoms of the stressful workplace. So we're seeing a lot of training now being focused on managers who've now got to deal with fostering psychological safety. They've got to be equipped to deal with mental health support.
Yes.
They've got to be equipped to deal with neurodiversity, and all these challenges are just being layered and layered and layered on top of managers. And we would say that that's fine, but all of those training responses are responses to the symptoms that are being experienced in the workplace. And actually, we need to get underneath that and understand why are we having this, why are we having mental challenges in the workplace, what's going on. And there's research now that shows that the impact that your line manager can have on you is greater than that of your spouse, and how you feel about yourself at the end of the workday will almost certainly have had some contribution from how you were treated by your manager that day. So I think it's incumbent upon all line managers to take quite seriously the privilege, which is being responsible for the advancement and the development and the contribution of a team that you are leading. And no longer can we just say, well, I'm doing my best, I'm throwing in the deep end. There are opportunities now for you to develop this engaging style of management, this operational coaching approach. And indeed, we have learners who are pursuing this program in 40 countries now. This is really becoming something because it fills a gap. None of us are actually guided as to exactly how we're supposed to engage in an inclusive way with people.
Right.
So I think it is taking it seriously. It's thinking about actually if I'm able to engage with people in a more respectful and authentic way, then I should be heading off the mental stress that that's causing because I'm a more authentic enabler of other
Mhm.
people's talents than simply defaulting to a mental model where I'm the command and control, problem solver, directing people all the time, which is just adding to pressure on them in the workplace.
Before we jump into the star system, the stop, think, ask, result, I'd like to get your viewpoint on what are the common pitfalls that the traditional managers face today or encounter today, and how does the star system address those?
Yeah, I think there are a number of pitfalls, and one is the mental model I talked about there. I think it's all too easy for managers to fall into the trap of thinking that they must have the answers, and I've met so many people who put pressure on themselves because the mental model they hold is they're the one in charge now,
Mhm.
and that's just sometimes that's just intolerable pressure. And of course, they're probably getting pressure from their own line manager themselves or senior leaders that they might report to. And so there's that's a really common pitfall, I think. And I put this at the door of leadership. I've worked with leadership teams where I stand in front of the team and I ask them, what is it you want your expensive embedded layers of management to be doing for you? Tumbleweed. No one's actually put voice to what is it we want our managers to do. But if we carry on the conversation, it always ends up with, well, we want our managers to create the environment where all of our workforce can flourish. And then it becomes a question, that's great, that's fantastic. How? How will you do that? How will you equip them? How will you give them the skills that do that? So that's a common pitfall. Um, I think the other pitfall is taking work back from people. You ask people to do something, and that doesn't go quite the way. So you take that back because you believe actually, if anyone's going to do it, I need to do it myself, and that's not right. I think we need to examine how we handed that piece of work over in the first place, and how we set the expectation for that. And again, that's about how have we enabled those individuals before handing them work to do. If we delegate too soon, the work will come back to us. And so lots of texts will talk about empowering people and delegating, but in fact, there's a whole missing step behind before that, which is enabling. You
Mhm.
have to build people's confidence up in bite-sized pieces to the point where you can empower them because now they're equipped. And once they're empowered and you've been able to celebrate a few things they've done, at that point, then you can begin to delegate and seed that work to them. But unless we go through that enable, empower before delegate, then the work's always going to come back to you. And that's another common pitfall. And I think the other one is just shrugging our shoulders and thinking, oh, I can't manage these young people, and perhaps avoiding some of those challenging conversations we perceive as challenging, which actually, if we learn to use a purposeful inquiry or an operational coaching approach, we can take the challenge out of those challenging conversations. So that's another pitfall, I think.
So let's talk about the STAR system. I love it. Stop, think, ask, result.
Yeah, this is going back to the work we were doing, this behavioral work, working with managers, and we found that the hardest thing to do is to break our habits. We people come to us for help, we feel obliged to help, we want to step in and help, and we feel good about having helped. And as I said, when we really examine this in detail, what we actually find is perhaps we're diminishing people or marginalizing them because we're sending them away to carry out our instruction, and we haven't really engaged any of their learning or their contribution at all. So we recognize that we needed to help managers identify the impact that they're having on people. And you can't just tell them, you have to create experiences where they reflect back on conversations they've had, and they work through the dynamics of that conversation, what went well, what didn't, and they begin to recognize that there are potential turning points in those conversations where it could have gone better. So we help them to develop mental triggers that, when those circumstances arise again, will get them to stop just long enough to take a mental breath,
Mhm.
long enough to think. And that's the next part of the model. Think about exactly what I said. What is this person coming to me for? What's behind it? What do they really need from me right now? Do they need me to brilliantly fix their problem, or actually are they looking for a bit of a confidence boost? Maybe they just want to have an idea they've got de-risked, as simple as that, and maybe just banter some of their thinking and to help them brainstorm maybe a theme. So recognizing that they might not just need the answer
Mhm.
leads us to then thinking about, well, what could be the most helpful question I could ask this person for where they're at right now
Right.
to help stimulate their thinking. And that's the skill set. So stop and think is the behavioral change. We've got to stop in order to think.
Mhm.
Ask is the skill part of this, of learning how to structure these questions in a way that's going to be most helpful to people. And you'll be really surprised when we began this journey, we went to the scientific literature, and there is very little research around how differently structured questions can impact someone's thinking.
Mhm.
And so, with only a small amount of study, you could become quite skillful at changing the way that you ask questions to really reach into people's minds and help stimulate their thinking. And of course, then if you've had a conversation and help somebody identify an action that they can take,
Mhm.
then you've only had a nice conversation if that doesn't lead then to a result. And that's the last part of the STAR model. And the result is gaining commitment from them to see that action through, and
Mhm.
then agreeing to follow up with them so that you can give them either appropriate appreciative feedback because they've done a fantastic thing, or helpful constructive feedback for how they might improve. And people really value that because it's attached to something that's real, that
Mhm.
they undertook, and they get a sense that you're coming from a good place. And you can only imagine if you have these conversations and then don't follow up, there's that loss of belief in where you were coming from. So the STAR model, once people start to apply it, is quite important to apply every element. I've got to stop, I've got to think, I've got to really engage this person by asking them powerful questions, and I've got to secure a result from that conversation. And, any of us might have, anywhere between sort of 10, 16 interactions with people a day. If we can just choose two or three of those a day where we're changing the tenor of the conversation, and we're doing that every day across the same group of people that we're working with, you can see how the aggregative effects of changing the dynamic of that conversation really start to change the dynamic of how you're working with people in your team. And so the results this generates are often very rapid. Within as little as 2 weeks, you will see the people who are commonly coming to you with problems are now starting to come to you with options they've worked through, because they can almost hear the questions you're going to be asking them, which is really powerful.
Years ago, during my time at Elsevier as the managing director of the Americas, I had a sales organization, 130 people, 65 of which were salespeople. And each salesperson and manager and myself as a senior vice president, we had our level of discounting that we could do without approval. However, if the account manager wanted to go above what they're allowed to do without any input from their manager or myself, they would have to write up something called the rules of the game. And the rules of the game, where they would give us the situation, the overview, they will have a recommendation and the justification for the recommendation. And what I found was that the rules of the game submissions actually decreased, and our profit performance actually went up.
Wow.
And a lot of the salespeople have gone on to be executives themselves. So I fully applaud and support the STAR system for that. To your point, how long on average does it take for someone to understand these skills, get trained in these skills, and apply these skills to the point where they become what we like to say is unconscious
Conscious.
competent?
Yeah, that's a great question. And historically, when we were working with groups of managers, we would do this in a workshop environment. But of course, that introduces constraints because you've got a lot of material to get through, and just from a cost economy point of view, you're going to have them in a classroom for 2 days. And even though there was activity that spread across 6 weeks, there's a huge chunk of learning to digest. So when we were invited by some of our larger clients to look at developing a blended learning approach to this, it really gave us license to break down every single aspect of this into very simple themes. And so we've developed this now as a really powerful and multiple award-winning modular program, which is that the learning content is delivered online as modules that you work through, and there are live opportunities for you to join at various times to suit your calendar to really help bring that alive. So it's a very powerful program. And the direct answer to your question is the program comes in two halves. So the first half is all about you and your style, how you impact people. And that's 10 modules, which we want people to do one module a week. So a 10-week program. You're
Mhm,
talking about half an hour of online activity,
mhm,
and then a short workplace mission we ask them to do, and then some reflection, and each week layers on. So managers are really building confidence in how they're having these conversations, how they're using the purposeful inquiry in the workplace. And then the second half of the program is about others. So if the first half was about you and your style, the second half is now how am I able to intentionally begin to stretch the capabilities of my team?
mm,
Where are those opportunities where I can use what I'm learning to help them to step up, to help them take on more accountability, to help them advance in the workplace? So at a stroke now, we're offering the solution now to succession development and succession planning, because I
mm.
now have the mechanism to actually be thinking about how I'm advancing members of my team.
Wow, that is huge. The London School of Economics conducted a government funding study of the STAR program with really great, impressive results, which was represented a 70% increase in coaching activity, an ROI amazing of 74x, and improved retention. What do these findings mean for organizations considering STAR? And can you share a client success story that best illustrates the commercial and cultural benefits of adopting this model?
Sure. So this is fascinating. We received a phone call one day, and it's from our government who had heard about operational coaching, and they wanted to know, can operational coaching improve UK productivity? And we said, well, based on the results that we're generating for our clients, we would say absolutely yes. We measure the results that this generates in their organizations. So they had us put our money where our mouth is, because they invited us to subject our entire program to academic scrutiny, and they invited the London School of Economics to take our program and research it to death. Basically, it took them a year to design this randomized controlled trial, which saw the Star Manager program put into 62 different organizations across 14 sectors to measure the impact. And you're quite right, the results were profound. The managers who were learning how to use these skills had increased the amount of time they spend coaching their team members in the flow of work by 70%. And LSE calculated that each manager had generated a 74 times ROI. So it was really profound stuff. And I think since the publication of their academic paper, and subsequently our book on this whole subject called "The Answer Is a Question,"
Mhm.
we're now working with larger organisations all around the world. And I guess to your question, a recent example, we're currently working with Virgin Atlantic.
Mhm.
During COVID, Virgin made most of their workforce redundant. And
Mhm.
as things started to improve, they recognised that they needed to re-recruit them back. But having been through that experience, they wanted to have them come back into an organisation, but they recognised the needs that we'd have to pull on every single skill and talent they had to help restore the company back to where it was at the front of the pack as a leader in the airline and holiday sector.
Mhm.
So they said, yeah, our managers need to be very different. They need to be able to have the skills to draw on all of those skills and talents
Mhm.
in a very unified way.
Mhm.
And we've been working with Virgin now just for a couple of years. Already, they have seen a 123% increase in the amount of time spent coaching. And through all the reported successes, they've generated already $13 million of reported benefit. And that increase in coaching time is really interesting. It's an increase in coaching time at the expense of doing less of the busy work that managers do. And managers end up doing too much work. They're doing the work that their team members should really be doing. And so Virgin saw a decline of 47% in that busy work, precisely because managers were better able to engage the skills and talents of their teams. So really powerful results, and these are not atypical. These are results we're seeing in all of the organizations where we implement this style of management.
Wow, that is huge. We're down to our last couple of minutes. I want to make sure that folks know how to contact you and where can they contact you. So please do share how folks can be in touch with you.
So they can find out more by going to starmanager.global/podcast. So starmanager.global/podcast. Um, the book I mentioned earlier is a book that really tracks the whole pedigree of the development of the STAR model. But more than that, we give you all the detail of the model. This is not a book that talks about the what. This is the book that gives you the how of the STAR model, how to apply it, and it also explores the ramifications for this incredible research, which turns out to have been the largest randomized control trial of its type anywhere in the world. So this is really significant stuff, and the one thing that the government identified from all this research is that operational coaching represents an advance in management practice. And that's why organizations like Virgin Atlantic and others are picking this up and saying, this is what we need in our organization. We want to be at the vanguard of a new way of engaging our newer generations.
Wow. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Mr. Dominic Ashley-Timms. He's the CEO of Notion Limited and the co-creator of the Star Manager program. Dominic, thank you for your time today and sharing your vision and this really great information for redefining management. Um, Remember that if you've missed any part of this audio, you can go to any of the podcasts stations and listen to the interview in its entirety. Dominic, thank you.
Thank you so much, Darrell. Thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, that wraps it up this week on Leadership with Darrell W. Gunter. Have a great day, but remember, leadership, it begins with you.